chapter Gimel, if you see there, and we're going to be 4 lines from the bottom of the page. Right in the middle it says Havaya de Lasata. We spoke about it yesterday and just now in our review. The lower Havaya, and now we're going on to the period where it says Dizehu. You see that?
Yes.
Everybody has that? Yaakov, you got that?
Havaya.
4 lines from the bottom of page Kuf.
In the middle of the line.
page. It says Dizehu after the period.
Yes.
Okay, here we go. Dizehu Mashukasuv. Havaya Elokeinu Havaya Echad. Oh, by the way, where do you see that there's 2 levels of Havaya? Go back into your Shema, right? It says Havaya twice for a reason, because there are 2 levels of Havaya, the higher and the lower. The Havaya Rishon, hu Havaya de La'ela. The first Havaya, which is Havaya Elokeinu, it's not connected yet with the word Echad. Remember we said before, Echad is that it indicates already the 8, the Ches and the Dalet is 8 and 4, the 7 heavens and the earth, the 4 directions. That's already dealing with world, and that the world is nullified to the Aleph. But the first Havaya, there's no Echad, it's Havaya Elokeinu. Just Havaya is our God. That goes on something which is above the Hishtalshalus. And that Havaya, it's not relevant anymore to say that it's one, so to speak, which means you're adding on the letters of the 7 heavens and the earth and the 4 directions of the world, as I just mentioned. Hu Yachid because it's not Echad, it's on the contrary, it's Yachid. Remember we said yesterday, Echad is like something, the word used for one when you're counting, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's one of many. The word Yachid, it means the only one, and that's the word for one you use when you're saying there's only one. So the first Havaya is actually Yachid. So therefore it doesn't say Echad afterwards. The Havaya based who Havaya de Lasata. The second Havaya where it says Echad, that's the lower Havaya, the Havaya of the Hishtalshalus, which makes the worlds negated into a higher unity.
So one is when it says Yachid, it's talking singularity.
Singularity. There is nothing to fuse together, because it's Hashem as He precedes the world.
Does it correspond with like this fact that it's Yachid and not Yechidah? Is this
Yechidah? Oh, you guys were talking. We still have our friends over here. You guys were talking about how do we access this? Like, does this have anything to do with us? You're just describing levels. So the Yechidah is the feminine word for the word Yachid. That's where you come in. You have a Yechidah. So if you want to access the Yachid level of Hashem, the singularity of Hashem in your own soul, there's something called the Yechidah of the Neshama, which is the aspect of you which is beyond, part of you which is sort of exists beyond the world, where you can, it's like the Pintele Yid, it's like the Ragla of the soul, and it's a container, it's a feminine word to that masculine Yachid, because it's the way that level can interact with us.
Okay.
So when talking about Yachid, you're talking about how Hashem has this power. When you're talking about Yechidah, it's how the soul receives them. So when you're talking about the lower Havaya, the Havaya of the Seder Hishtalshalus, then you can say Havaya Echad. V'zoi mailas haneis, daspakas Hashemin l'shmor yamim. And now we can understand the high value and quality of the miracle that the oil lasted for 8 days. Shizchil b'chavva b'kislev, which that started already on the 26th of Kislev, which is Chavva b'gematria Havaya. 26 is Havaya on its own, the first Havaya. And we can see how that is higher, ala neistam the Matzias Pach Shem and Tar, how it's a higher miracle than finding the jug of pure oil.
What is Tahor?
Pure. Shanes the Matzias Pach Shemen, because the miracle of finding the jar of oil, which is on the 25th of Kislev, is Keneged Chafei Osius the Shema Yisrael. We already said that's associated with the 25 letters of the Shema, which is called Yichud Ilah, which is called the higher unity, right? And the higher unity is actually associated with the lower Shem Havaya, as we've associated. Right? Havaya Echad, the Havaya which you can say Echad, which unifies the heavens and the earth. You with me on this?
Still 2 separate things, though.
Sort of? Or totally? Got me 100%.
Conceptualizing in my mind as you guys.
Okay. So again, the 25, which is the miracle of finding the oil. This is associated with the Shema, 25 letters. The Shema says Hashem Echad, right? And the Echad means that you're still unifying Havaya with the world, which means it's the Havaya of the Hishtalshalus, which means it's the lower Shem Havaya. Because the higher Shem Havaya is beyond the Hishtalshalus entirely. It's not unifying anything. It's only one there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you say that Hashem basically contracts himself
Right.
to these four different worlds.
Yes.
And we live in the last world, sort of.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
The world where godliness is
Hidden.
concealed.
Yes.
So if we know that Hashem is the entire world, and it's really technically nothing, like Ein Od Mil Bado, the entire world is God, then how is it possible what's the logistical way in which God contracts himself?
The Shem Elohim. Right? If the Shem Havai was shining, all these four worlds would recognize that they're part of this name, Yud Ke Vav Ke, and they would realize that they're just in one name. They're Echad. They're Echad. But when Hashem filters, you're talking about the contraction now, you're talking about him putting something in front of the Shem Havaya. So instead of coming out in its full-blown glory, it comes out like in rays, which are independent from each other. One is Atzilus, one ray, one is Bria, one is Yetzirah, and one is Asiya. So we don't. It means to say you don't see the name Havaya. You're only seeing the rays that come out of it, and because you're only seeing a ray, you feel that yourself to be in a separate, independent existence in whatever world you may be in. So in the world of Atzilus, they're also only getting a ray, but they're getting a huge ray. Right? Whereas we are already four worlds down, we're getting a ray of a ray of a ray of a ray, and therefore we feel ourselves completely independent. Now, we can still acknowledge that we come from this oneness, and therefore act the truth, which is called subduing ourselves, but we want Mashiach now, which means we want to see like the sun, so to speak, break through the clouds, and that we'll actually experience ourselves attached to the Shem Havaya, and that would be the higher unity.
But going off of that point, that basically what you're saying, I think, is that there's different sefiras, and instead of all the sefiras being one, they're all separate, and so we consider ourselves to be in one sphere, which sort of gives us the independence,
Right.
to think that we're actually separate from from God. So if that's the case, then wouldn't we actually do the opposite and feel that we're part of a certain sphere, which is like our connection to God, even though we're not connected to all of the spheres together?
We do. I mean, we feel ourselves to be associated with the sphere, let's say, or you're talking about spheres, I'm talking about worlds, but it's the same thing. The world of Asiya, we feel ourselves to be connected with like the final hay of Hashem's name, right? Which means we have some enlivening force inside of us, right? Now it's the lowest level of it, but it's the life force that we feel inside of us. So I mean, we are in a certain sense associating with some form of divine energy. It's just a contracted one, right? But ultimately, when the name is shining in full, you don't feel yourself to be connected with a particular letter in a name, right? If like your name is Moshe, do you ever even think once in your life that you have a specific connection with the Hey of Moshe, or the Shin of Moshe, or the Mem of Moshe? No. When the word is connected, all of you is Moshe, which means even the foot is connected to the highest levels of that name. When you're separating the letters and you don't feel the overlaying force of the whole thing, that's when all of a sudden you're trying to figure out what's your connection to the Hey. Maybe your foot is a Hey, and your belly is a Shin, and your mind is a Mem. But like it's because you're in a fractured state, so you're like looking for a fractured aspect of life force to come in and enliven that. All right, let's continue. So we said that the 26th of Kislev, connected with the Shem Havaya, goes on the higher name of Hashem, which is even above the higher unity. Right? This fourth line down from the top of the page, Kuf Aleph. The miracle, which is associated with lasting for 8 days. And why 8? Because the number 8 is something which represents that which is above the Hishtalshalus, right? In general, we talk about 7 levels, and that's nature, and that's like the recurring pattern, and that's where there's sort of a notion of world. The mention of them, number 8, is intended to basically bring us to a realization that there's something beyond worlds. Hashem is alone. And that's why when it comes to the miraculous nature of the oil lasting longer, which started on the 26th, and therefore has the Shem Havaya, we know it's about the higher Shem Havaya, because it's associated suddenly with 8 days, which takes us to beyond creation entirely. Not God as he unifies with creation, God as he precedes the creation. And therefore, this what's drawn down, and you're talking about again, how do we access this? All you got to do to access this is be Jewish during Hanukkah, because you're in the middle of an 8-day holiday. And the only reason that there's an 8-day holiday is because there's something from the level of 8 which like seizes existence at that moment, is suddenly accessible to us. Something which is beyond creation is what is enlivening the 8-day holiday of Hanukkah. Sure, if you light the menorah, right, then you sort of like hone in and have the tools to open it up. And you keep all the halachas of Hanukkah. That's how you basically access it. But even if you would keep all those halachas of Hanukkah today, for example, it wouldn't help you. Because that little 8-day scenario is 8 because it is a moment which is accessing that which is beyond creation, right? And that is called the Havaya de La'ela. And by the way, that's what 8 is. 8 is 4 plus 4, which is basically telling you that there's this, you've reached the second level of Havaya. Not just the Havaya which is in the Ishtalshlus, but the Havaya which goes beyond it. That's also where the number 8 comes from. V'yesh Lomar. You got that?
No, I'm just. Then we've got the 7 worlds. We've got the 7 heavens and the world. That's 8, but that's like 8 within the bounds of finite.
Yeah, you could say that.
And how are you breaking up the 4? You know, you said it's 8, but then you just said
Yud K Vav K, and then Yud K Vav K. Very simple.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, but I guess what you're saying there is basically how the levels can be cloaked. In other words, how is the Havaya cloaked? So on one hand, it's cloaked in the 7 in a different way that it's cloaked in that extra 1. Because even though we're saying there's 4 worlds, it's known that those are 4 spiritual worlds. And then below the spiritual worlds, there's also called the physical world of Asiya. So there's 2 Asiyas. Asiya, which is Ruchni, and Asiya, which is Gashmi. The way that, so if you want to say there's 7, why is, in other words, in the Shema, when you're saying the world is 8, I mean, you're bringing out a point here, which I think we have to address, right? What you're saying, you break it up into 7 heavens and the earth. Well, what is this earth? Like, right? Because the 7 heavens is really an indication of, anyway, the 4 worlds, the spiritual worlds. When it pops off into the earth, that's like that, it goes from spiritual to physical, and it's like a whole nother crazy tzimtzum. And that, in the lowest place, that number 8 is actually brought to you by, you guys like to say, the higher level of Havaya, but in a very concealed state. So the Havaya can conceal itself on one level just by being sort of covered over by the name Elohim and creating the spiritual existence. But if it's going to go pushing further and creating the physical existence, the lower Havaya is not responsible for that. It's actually the higher Havaya which is responsible for making it physical, but it's also in a state of complete contraction. Right? So it's like that which is above the worlds entirely, when it's basically not seen as godliness, it's seen as the ultimate disconnected worldliness of physicality.
It's the contraction that is the blueprint for the overlay for the Gashmi.
It is the Gashmi, right? When you contract the Havaya de La'ela, and what's the symbolism between them? What is Havaya de La'ela? It's basically Hashem is alone. It's just I am the only one. When you turn that into darkness, it's a feeling of Gashmias, physicality. We say we got here from nowhere. We're the only, like the 7 heavens, which is the lower Shem Havaya, the creations in those worlds don't think that they got there by themselves. They just think that their self is in existence, which is perpetually created by Hashem. When you get to the lowest level, earth, physicality, we're the ones who actually feel completely independent from Hashem. We don't have this notion that we are being enlivened at all moments. We feel like I'm an I, independent. Where do we get this? From the higher level of Havaya, which is the true I. So when that is sort of like manipulated in a dark way, it turns into Gashmias. When the lower level of Havaya is contracted, it just turns into the higher worlds. See the difference? Okay.
So do we represent the 8 like we represent also the transcendent element, right? While we're still
But we
in
have
our
to
physical
transform
goof,
it.
right?
Yeah, right. But it's ultimately hidden. Let's move on. That was a little bit of our own little 2 cents. Back in the mimer. We've now lost 2
6 cents.
students with the perpetuation of
I can go-
Os
I'll
Gimel.
go-
Let's see if we can keep everybody else.
retrieve
No, it's all right. Please. V'yesh lomar. And we can say, D'zeu gam sheb'shema Yisrael yesh chafve asvun b'chinas ko. Or we're adding another element here. Not that complicated. But the idea is that the letters chaf, okay, the Shema has 25 letters. It also spells the word ko. Right? Now, what is ko? What's interesting about ko is that in general, not kol, ko, chaf, hey. We say in general, there's like a throwback to another conversation which is not happening on the page, which is that there's basically when the prophets prophesize, there's 2 ways that they can come out with their prophecy. Right. Zeh and ko. Right? Zeh Amar Hashem. Right? Hashem said this. Or ko Amar Hashem. And you find both languages in the Torah. Right? When you say ko, it also has a chaf in the beginning, which when you say chaf means like. Right? It's like when you say something, it's ke'ilu, it's like this, right? That's what the word chaf, if you put it before a word, it means to compare something to. It's not the actual thing. That's what right? If you know a little bit Hebrew, the chaf is a comparative. So when you say ko, said Hashem, you're saying Hashem spoke something like this, right? So it's like a little bit of a fogginess of the direct prophecy. So in general, it says all the other prophets can prophesize in ko, but Moshe prophesizes with zeh, because when you say zeh Amar Hashem, right? So you're saying this exact thing is what Hashem said. It's like a pure message from above. Zeh Keli Vanveyu, right? So like the ultimate level of revelation is zeh.
It says ko sometimes.
In the Torah also it says ko,
anyway, but
it's basically
usually it's
not necessarily like the ko of the Torah is that even Moshe can also prophesize with ko, but Moshe can prophesize with zeh, right? In other words, like he has a zeh capacity. Anyway, what are we finding here? That the word ko also has a gematria, which happens to be 25, and 25 is the number of the Shema, which we now know is the higher unity, but
Still has it.
it's the lower Shem Hashem, right? So what he's trying to say here is that this is why the 25 is merely ko. You know, we're like knocking the Shema down a notch by saying that 25 is only ko, right? And even though going inside, now even though in general, when we usually talk ko and zeh, we usually say the following: ko is the lower unity, zeh is the higher unity, which means we usually associate even the lower Shem Havaya with zeh. Did you get that?
No.
We usually there's the lower unity and the higher unity.
Gotcha.
So we usually say the lower unity is ko, right? And the higher unity is zeh. But here we're discovering that the name for the higher unity is a 25 letters of the Shema, and 25 spells ko. So in some capacity, even though the Shema is the higher unity and it's usually called zeh for that reason, when you're comparing it to the true name of Havaya, it is also called ko. And that's actually right there in its name because it's 25 letters. You getting that?
Ko is 25?
Ko is 25. So that's what he says. Even though the higher unity in general is usually zeh, and the reason why here we're calling it ko is because the lower Shem Havaya compared to the higher name Havaya is kamo Elokim. It's considered like Elokim. In other words, even though we're talking about Havaya, since it's the lower one, it might as well be Elokim, which is a ko, because it's already after a contraction. It seems the lower Shem Havaya is contracted. So it's like an Elokim in this capacity. Everyone got that? Whereas the bittul that takes place, the self-nullification that takes place in the higher unity, right? Which comes from the lower Shem Havaya, right? In comparison to the higher name Havaya, who kamo Yehuda Tata, ko, it's considered like a lower unity. So the higher unity, when you're comparing it to the higher Shem Hashem, is considered merely like a lower unity. And so here's how this works. The lower unity is always called ko. Usually the higher unity is called zeh. But when we're comparing now all this to the true name Havaya, even the higher unity is like a lower unity, and therefore it's Gematria 25, which means Ko, right? Which means if you can get to that Yechida, which is a Kli for the Yachid, you can bring a type of unity which is not unifying two things, but it brings a level which is there's mamish only one thing, and therefore any notion of unity, even a higher unity, is considered like a lower unity. Maybe you want to rewind and hear that line again. But it's all in there, I promise. And so it is when it comes to the finding of the jar of oil, which happened on the 25th of Kislev. Even though it's mamash a miracle, and the whole Chanukah is established on the 25th because of finding that miracle, finding that oil, it's only the 25th. It's a ko. Because when you compare it to the reality of the 8 days that it lit miraculously, which comes from the higher Shem Havaya, it's merely a ko. It's 25. The true reality of Zeh is not the higher unity which comes from the Shema, it's the higher unity which comes from above the Ishtal Shalus, the higher name of Hashem, which we're only calling it unity with like a borrowed name because it's really only one, right? And that's the true level of Zeh. And that is associated with the miracle of Haspakis Hashem and Lishmona Yamim. That's where you get the 8-day lasting oil. She's and that really started on the 26th of Kislev, full on Gematria Havaya. And that whole reality is coming to you, brought to you by Havaya de La'ela, the higher Havaya, which is above the Ishtal Shlus, i.e. the days of Chanukah are 8. Because there's an 8-level thing happening during that time, which is above all notion of worlds. Os Dalit.
Would we only experience that the higher level independently without any connectivity on every day of the Hanukkah?
Once you're like in that 8, it's available, right?
Even though the 8 sustains itself over.
So what we're saying is, even though you're going through the 8, every single day that you're having Hanukkah, you're in an 8. Which is now going to beg the question as to what?
8 times 8.
That begs the question of why is it only starting on the 26th, right? If you're already in an 8-day process on the 25th, then the 25th should also be like a 26 level. You understand what I just said?
Sure.
In other words, we're saying it only starts on the 26th, and it starts an 8-day process, which happens the whole Hanukkah, which means that level of the Yechida, whatever it is shining from the get-go until the end. So why is there like even something called the lower unity hanging around the 25th? Maybe the whole holiday should start on the 26th for that reason, or something to that nature. We'll see. That's kind of like the leading question.
It seems like there's an 8 times 8 in here somehow, or 8 immersed within the 8. Like 64 must be something.
That's how many candles you light over the whole period of time.
36.
36, but plus the shamish?
36.
Then it's
With the shamish? It's 36?
That's
45.
I don't remember.
Yeah, plus
Some kind of a thing over there.
Well, 45 is also an emanation, right?
42.
45. I don't know how it came out to 45 though. 8 plus 7 is 15.
Don't ask. All right, we'll do the math.
21.
Adam.
My mind is upon other things.
Anyway.
Dalid.
Yeah. It's,
Let's just start off Dalid. We have a few more minutes.
36,
And we'll
36.
just jump into Dalid for a
Messed up,
second here.
36.
Since Yutes Kislev is tonight, who knows where we'll be in the next couple days. So let's jump into Dalid.
We can elevate out of
Mamshich ba'maimer. He goes on in the Maimer. Who? The Frierdiker Rebbe. We're basing this on the previous Rebbe's Maimer. So the previous Rebbe continues in his Maimer. And he says, Da'agam. Sheneros Chanukah tiknu mipnei haneis shaya b'neros hamikdash. That even though in principle the Chanukah menorah was established as a holiday commemorating candles based on the temple's menorah, right? So in other words, it was like they don't just stop make up holidays. They made holiday with lights and a menorah, which is basically based on something that we already had in the Kodesh, which was the menorah. V'kol the tiknun rabban ke'ein doraisa tiknun, and anything that the rabbis instituted, they did it as exactly what I just said. They did it in something which is compared to something which was in the Torah. They didn't just make up random things. You can find all the mitzvahs d'Rabbanan are hanging on some Torah thing. So, for example, even though there might be slight differences, there has to be something. So the Rebbe points this out. Well, wait a second. There's 8 days of Hanukkah. Where do they get that from in the Torah? Right? What is Hanukkah based on? The principle. If there's nothing, there's only 7-day holidays in the Torah, seemingly, right?
The temple menorah had 7 branches. Right?
Right? But so they can't go running off on their own. Where do they get 8?
Yeah.
Right? So he says that
Shmini.
Shmini Atzeres, basically, that actually Hanukkah is based on Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres, and that's why if you go look and there's an argument which says between Shammai and Hillel, do we light the candles going increasingly higher or increasingly lower? Hillel says we start with 1 and we go to 8 because Mailim b'Kodesh ve'in morid. You have to go always higher in Kodesh. What does Shammai say? Do you remember?
Oh, he goes the other direction.
He goes from 8 to 1. Why? He gives a reason.
There's less
Yeah,
light in the
because the
world.
light got less and less.
Why?
It's like a miracle.
Why? He bases it on something. He says Kapari Achag. He says because of the bulls on Sukkot, which go down. Right? You start with 70 and then right, where you ultimately get up to 70, but you start with 13, then you go to 12, then you go to 11. So that's one of the only places in the Torah where the Torah itself goes down. And because Hanukkah is actually based on Sukkot, the Rebbe says Hillel also agrees that in theory, because it's based on Sukkot, it should go down. In other words, Shammai is not just coming out with some random example of something that goes down. He's saying, anyway, Hanukkah is based on Sukkot. How do you know? It's the only 8-day holiday. And therefore, they based it on Sukkot. And therefore, we should do like we do on Sukkot and go down. And Hillel would have agreed, except for the fact that we always go up.
Okay,
But the fact that it's connected with Sukkot, he agrees.
why is Sukkot diminishing? Please, I'm lost.
Because the Sukkot is a unique thing, because on Sukkot we're offering the animals for the nations. And when it comes to the nations, which is the Nefesh Bahamas, it's in Mailim B'Kodesh. When you're dealing with the Nefesh Elokis, you go up. When you're dealing with Nefesh Bahamas, which is what those animal offerings are, they're for the nations, which represent the animalistic tendencies of a person, then that you want to diminish. So that's the one area where it goes down. In any case, in this case, we have a question. If it was based on the menorah of the temple, which has 7 branches, then here we see that there's a problem. We have 8. And not only in that one area is the menorah of Hanukkah different, but in several areas there's some unique differences between the menorah of Hanukkah and the menorah that they based it on, which is the menorah of the Mikdash. And we will get to this next time.
Oh no,
Yeah. When do we?
I'm on the edge of my seat.
We should have